Ready to hit the big city or meet the girls for a weekend of fun and brunch? Southwest has you covered because we have low fares to everywhere you love, like New York, Orlando, Chicago.
If everybody would grab a seat. Good evening. Before we get started tonight, I want to see if we can add an executive session to discuss land acquisition, Ken. So do we need to take a motion and vote on that?
So the agenda, yes.
Okay. All right. So,
Mayor, I move that we have an executive session after the work session today.
okay, I've got a motion and a second to add an executive session to our work session at the end of the work session to discuss land acquisition. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That's unanimous. Who's missing? We got just one missing. Okay. Well, Carol, you can set up. Carol, we got an empty seat here. I'm just kidding. All right, welcome to November 14, 2018 regularly scheduled work session. Tonight there are 4 items on the agenda. Public comment is allowed that is germane to an agenda item. If you wish to speak, you are required to fill out a public comment card. And if you are speaking on behalf of an organization, you must fill out an affidavit that you have the authority of said organization. Please remember this is not a time to engage the mayor or members of city council in a conversation. When your name is called, please come forward and speak into the microphone stating your name and address for the record. Public comment will be allowed for a total of 10 minutes per agenda item and no more than 2 minutes per person. Public comment will be heard at the beginning of the item, and once the item is called, no other public cards will be accepted. So we added an executive session, motion and vote. So, Sudi, if you'll please sound our agenda number 1 item.
Good evening. The first item is Milton Equestrian Committee update. Ms. Courtney Spriggs.
For sure. Well, just walk around, Julie. Good evening. This is Julie Shannon, Chair of the Milton Equestrian Committee. I'm going to set up her PowerPoint really quickly, and she's going to give an update.
Oh, are you already set? You are.
I think your husband's here watching too somewhere.
Council person.
Just don't put the worst videos on there, okay?
Got it. Cool. All right, do you want to look up there at top? And me click? Okay. Got it.
Hi, everybody. Is this on? I'm Julie Shannon. I am the chair of the Milton Equestrian Committee, and this is more of a PowerPoint regarding who we are, what we do, and what we're trying to do to help the city. So our committee is organized through a bunch of appointees that the city council has appointed, and we are there to advise and create initiatives that the city will utilize with our recommendations, hopefully. And most of us are from various backgrounds, and we're all interested in helping preserve our unique character and our rural heritage. This is our committee, and our vacant post has now been appointed, and we now have Susan Kimball, who's about to be appointed. Thank you, Matt Goots. So we have a focus and action. Our committee members' focus is keeping horses and farms in Milton. And our landowners are often enticed to sell to all the subdivisions and create cookie cutter subdivisions throughout. And what we would like to do is stimulate interest and some support for the rural horse farms of Milton to create our city in being something different and not at all like what Roswell and City of Alpharetta and so on are like. And that's part of the thing we're trying to focus on with our passive use trails and other things in the community that will stimulate horse enthusiasm. Part of what we believe our heritage is of horse ownership, and we develop in our area naturally this way, and preserving it is going to help our city be different from everyone else. We would like to support Birmingham Park to be a passive use park for equestrians, and part of creating other parks, areas, bridle paths to be accessible to Birmingham Park will help create more of a rural heritage and give our city something different that none of the other cities have. Part of our action we would like to do is take responsibility with keeping up with those trails. And we'd like to figure out what we can do to support the city in creating ideas to stimulate the community getting out and taking care of our trails as well. Some of our best practices we all engage in as members of our committee. We talk often about best practices of horse care and horse properties and how to maintain the heritage of our city and what the quaint character that it has by not allowing horse farms that will not stimulate a positive environment. And a lot of the things we'd like to do is help develop guidelines that can help horse farms stay within a positive outlook from all of our neighboring citizens. We have a commitment to succeed. As we look forward, we'd like to do more. And our group is ready to help in any way that can possibly get more involved with how our trails are built. And we have been working with the people that are doing the design for all of our green spaces, and that's been very helpful. We would like to provide advisement on any of the rural things that are involved with regarding to horses. Does anybody have any questions about what we can do to help our other committees?
I first just want to thank you guys. I know it's a tough, our equestrian community is probably, it's obviously one of the top things that people like about this area, that love it here in Milton, but, it's the reason they move here and move into a subdivision, which is kind of, affects it oppositely, which is not helping the situation. And, we realize that with property values and so many people moving here, it's hard to promote to get someone to move here and just buy land and start a horse farm from scratch. So anything we can do to keep the existing horse farms and support. So I just want to, number one, thank you guys, because that's very important, I think, for our community.
One of our next step situations is discovering what we can do as a committee to work within a budget of monetary programs of any sort, so that we know how we need to organize what we're doing, what sort of funds are available to our group, and if there's a guideline or any sort of support system we need to have a direct line access, so that we know how to proceed with some of the things we'd like to support with.
And I'd also, and I'll let everybody else speak, I'd like to suggest that maybe someone on the staff level, community development or whatever, if you guys could meet with, and we could, with your input, find out what ordinances and regulations we have now that negatively impact horse farms. And, sometimes you don't realize, but we may have, ordinances for this and that, but somebody that buys, has an equestrian, all of a sudden, well, this gets in the way or that, or they can't put a barn, or they can't do this and that. And so we have unintentional consequences. So if there are some things that maybe we could, as a council, look at, and if there's some requirements we could waive on actual horse farms or equestrian facilities, but, that would benefit, and rather than having somebody say, well, hold their hands up, well, I can't do this or that, we'll just build a subdivision on it. So
that sounds like a great idea.
So Laura, and then I think Joe had some.
Just to follow on what Joe was saying, yes, absolutely. The ordinances that we get feedback on that are detrimental to turning over horse farms, we really need to pay attention to those. We did that back when we figured out that farms were not being able to put the barn, in front of the home. A lot of properties were flipping and becoming subdivided. So that is something that I would encourage the equestrian committee to ask anyone that that comes here in search of a property, and they get deterred or disappointed for not being able to do something like a covered arena. I think we've gotten that fixed, but if you get feedback, that's really important. I really think it's important that we make Milton a destination, that we really cultivate our trail system. And I think that the low-hanging fruit there is Birmingham Park. The trails are existing. I'd love to see a equestrian foundation to, help keep the trails maintained. I think the work day that you all had last winter was phenomenal, and it brought some folks together. With the repurposing of Wills Park, that's another opportunity so that, people, yes, our property taxes are sky high, but if we can provide enough fringe benefits within our community, attractions, that people will come here seeking out our bridle paths, our connections to places where you can ride out, not in a ring, and have that unique experience in Milton. I think that we can justify some of our higher taxes. So I appreciate the group's hard work, and I know it's not easy. It's easier. We hear it all the time as a question. I'm just going to go to Cherokee or Forsyth to do my business, but hopefully we can bring them in with these ideas of creating a situation that's very unique and it's worth paying the taxes here.
Okay, Joe?
Yeah, so you mentioned the bridle walking trails, and I just wanted to understand, do you see those as overlapping the Milton Trail system, or is there something that it adds on to the current plan for a trail system?
I think based on the current plan that we've seen, that they're working on now with Kimley Horn, I think those paths are perfect. They've really got them well laid out. All of the parks that they're putting bridle paths on all connect to each other. That's a good starting point. As you move forward, you can always add more trails and connect for more dirt roads to more trails as things go on. But I do think that that's a good starting point, and those trails are adequate enough to create a system where people can go to one place and park, ride, make connections from one trail group to the next trail group through a bridle path back down to another trail group, because there's 3 different parks that they're trying to encourage bridle paths on. And those riding trails, if you have 3 different parks of riding trails with connecting dirt roads and connecting bridle paths on short bits of busy land or busy sidewalk sides, you'll be fine. That they can all horses, if they have enough shoulder, are fine on a busy road as long as they don't have to stay on it for too long. So I think it's a very adequate system already. What we would like to do is help take care of it, help promote it, come up with events and things that will tell the community where they're available so that you can draw in equestrians instead of them all leaving.
Yeah. Have you guys been engaged with, I guess it was a year ago now, we bought the Milton Country Club. And, obviously that's got to be, well, in my way of thinking,
that's a hot button for me. I think that's a great place to put riding trails.
Yeah, that's. I'm glad you said that, because I was thinking it makes perfect sense. Mm-hmm. So, and it also minimizes the impact that we have focusing on just one park. Mm-hmm. So if you have 2 parks, you can at least divide the traffic in 2. If you had 3, you can divide it, by a third.
Well, and they've also discussed having trails over on the Freemanville woods over there where they were going to put the school. Mm-hmm. So that puts 3 parks. Birmingham Park is actually the furthest to get to, but after talking to them and showing them some back roads how they could get there, they actually have figured out how to network those to Birmingham Park as well. So it's actually a very good system the way they have it laid out. What I think is most important about those trails is that if you have a network system and you recruit people in to ride those trails from other neighboring areas, they're all going to want to live closer to them. They're not going to want to haul that far. So if we can promote that, we'll actually promote more land purchase for farms instead of land purchase for subdivisions.
So do you guys meet with the Parks and Rec Board on a regular basis? Do you guys share those ideas? Because they're in charge of developing a lot of that, and so it would
You
seem
meet,
like
you meet
you're-
with Dave every day, right? Most every day
Yeah.
you meet with
Most
Dave?
every day I have a little insider push, but
I forgot about that.
Tried to put
Okay,
the fire
good
wall,
point.
but it ain't working.
Good point.
You know, one thing I think to add too, that, and you probably already thought about it, but we really need to communicate and, for lack of a better term, educate our citizens on horses though.
Yes.
Because most people, you know, don't know anything about them and they think, well, it's pretty, but they go flying by in the car and scare them. So I think we need to educate our citizens, you know, as we roll out these horse trails. You know, here's adequate.
Milton people are brave. It's usually not Milton people flying by. It's people from other counties flying through Milton. That's actually more likely. But education is always a good idea.
Okay, anybody else?
I just,
Matt?
Julie, thanks for all you're doing as well. A couple of questions. Is there any way, maybe staff you can help too, is there a way to quantify how many horses we have in Milton? How many acres we actually have that are equestrian, and how many acres or how many yards or miles on the equestrian trails? I'm wondering what gets measured against done. I've never seen anybody ask that before. So I'd love to know where those trends are as far as where they are, what land is possible, what might be an equestrian opportunity, and maybe with our GIS system we can figure out some of this information. And I don't know if we would even know that we can do that.
I don't know that we have done it. I don't know that it's possible for the committee to do it, only because we don't have that inside information. I think maybe you could probably contact somebody in the Department of Agriculture and get those horse farms sort of listed as to who's paying taxes for what. In terms of, I can just tell you from driving around, we're losing horse farms, we're not gaining them. Everybody's got their farms up for sale. So that's not a good sign. That just tells you the property values are so high that they're looking to make money on their property.
But if we know where we are, we might have just a baseline to be able to just have the quantifying. I think that would help us as funding goes. When people ask us for funding, I think I'd love to give that to you. And we want to make sure the most.
I think that's an excellent point.
From a land standpoint, that's not a problem. So it's how we defined what an equestrian piece of property is. So the GIS system, it's easy to go in and say we have so many properties above 5 acres, and we've done that analysis on a number of different occasions. So that information is available, but it's all in how you define the equestrian properties.
Yeah, and then the actual horses. In fact, Carter, maybe in your spare time, you could ride around and count the horse, count the legs, and then divide by 4.
Yeah, I think a horse farm is anything that has a barn on it that's occupied.
Yeah, but it's still going to be hard. There might be
Doesn't
2
matter if
horses,
it's
there
one
might be
horse or
1, there might be, 12.
Well, and I think donkeys count, because people appreciate those 6 little mini donkeys on Freelandville just as much as 3 horses sitting out there. So we struggled with this, is how do we define, but in the end, I
Hooves.
think, how do we define a farm? But in the end, it's parcels, I think 5 acres or more that are green space. And those are what we want to protect. And I would just, sorry, I took your microphone, but I wanted to encourage the equestrian committee to also, I'd love to see a CUBA workshop for farm owners so that we can help fill out those forms and have someone here from Fulton County Tax Assessor's Office to identify. One of the trickiest ones is the bona fide between 5 and 10 acres, which is, I bet, where most of our farms fall. And we've got to help people apply for that CUBA so that we can, take some of the tax burden off them. And there are ways to do it, and there's experts in the city, and I would love to, provide guidance there. I know you're in a CUBA, and I also was in one.
I think the main point of my coming here and presenting this is I want the committee to have relevance in the community and do things that are positive with regard to horses and rural land, yes. But more importantly, we need a direct line of communication where council, actual people that make the rules can advise us on all of what we're doing so that we can make good choices for the horse farms. So I think that's part of the reason for being here. That was our main reason for presenting, is to know what we can do, how we can support, and how to create direct lines of access so that when we have questions like, oh, we'd like to try doing thus and such thing, who do we contact? Who are those people that are going to be interested in those ideas?
You know, and let me help with that too. Number one, please, there's no crazy ideas or stupid ideas or whatever. If you guys think of something that you think would be beneficial, please share it with us. And it can go through Courtney, it can go through staff. I'm also, you can send emails to, all the council members. But let's open those doors that we're open to listen to anything and if it's something that maybe it can't be done, then obviously we'll let you know or we'll run it by staff. But no, I think we do have to, promote open communication with your committee. Laura, one more
comment. This is so exciting. I could stay here all night and talk about this. But last thing, we were in Myrtle Beach for visiting a child in school, and for 4 hours I watched an annual trail ride down that beach. People came from near and far. It was a destination. It was a gathering of horses. I mean, for 4 hours, all different types. They closed the beaches, and I would love to see something like that become an annual event in this city that is a trademark of our community.
We haven't forgotten about our trail.
No, I know, and I think that, we have a great place, and I know that you all are working on that, and I think, 50 years from now, we'll be known for that, because we hopefully will have the land, and we're working on that, so.
Yeah. All right.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you to the entire committee. Do we have any public comment, Sudi, on that item or
There
the
are
next
none,
item?
sir. None.
Okay. And if you'll please call the next item.
Our next item this evening is discussion with the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board regarding a memorandum of understanding with the City of Alpharetta and the Parks and Recreation Commission structure. Mr. Jim Craig.
Presentation.
All right.
Okay, thanks.
Just bringing up the slideshow. We just finished, pardon?
Do you want to give one to Steve?
Okay. Mayor and Council, you may recall that there was a joint meeting of the Parks and Rec Advisory Board and Council on July 30th. And at that time, some issues were presented, and he asked the Parks and Rec Board to come back and do some more diligence. This is the other half of that. This is their recommendations. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Stahusky, our chairman. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Mayor, Council, staff, thank you for this opportunity, the second opportunity to come back in front of the City Council as a joint session of the Parks and Rec Advisory Board. It's good to be recognized this evening, although we were missed last night. But we have many.
Not by choice.
Yeah, I know.
That's why we give you front
Wasn't
row
your
seat
fault.
right here.
We're a bigger mass today, so it is a pleasure, though. It's been a long time, a lot of work, and clearly Parks and Rec are doing a lot of things to help provide advice to you. I'm speaking tonight to lead this discussion, but I need to thank all the members of the Parks and Rec Advisory Board, and particularly Jim and staff. We've done a lot of man hours to get to the point we're at tonight. Tonight we're going to cover two things for you in a little bit of detail. And Tom, if you're leading the slides, you can click along. So our two items we're going to talk about, as Jim mentioned, is the MOU, and we're also going to talk about the commission structure. There was a third item that came out of discussions in late summer about field capacity and efficiency of scheduling, and frankly, We learned a lot about capacity. We shared some of that at the August meeting. But to make a recommendation, we just didn't have enough time to get to that in some detail. The MOU's got a time clock that's staring us in the face, so we thought we'd focus on that first, and we'd come back to planning and scheduling for next year. This slide we showed at our last meeting is just a kind of a paint of the picture of our problem with the MOU and our opportunities. This MOU began in the fall and it addressed two big issues for the city of Milton. It took away the out-of-city fees for our residents, and it opened up access to Alpharetta's programming so that we increased the recreational opportunities for our residents. As you can see in the graph, you don't need to see all the numbers. The total cost is the red bars, and you can see that it's increased greatly. I think in 2017, total cost was about $471,000. Important on this topic about who's using the MOU, there's about 1,400 families in the city of Milton. There's about 1,600 and plus registrations of our residents that are taking advantage of opportunities to partake in Alpharetta programming. So that's 1,400 families compared to the thousands. We're probably upwards of 3,000 families in our own programming. So it's a significant chunk of the overall recreational activity within our city. Questions that we talked about is, what should we offer, where and when, and can we continue to subsidize all these city fees? And we're going to show you a couple of recommendations to address that. So here's our three big buckets for tonight's conversation as it relates to the MOU. And our recommendations to all of you as council. The first is to fill up our existing fields and facilities that we have, right? We've made an investment in those, whether those are facilities covered by the intergovernmental agreements or whether the improvements we made to Bell Memorial Park, we've got a wonderful asset there. In addition to other more passive parks, we need to increase programming opportunities in those, invest in the things that we currently already have. The MOU, as it has an annual expiration on it, it's time to renegotiate it. We're going to give you some specifics there. And then any savings that we can achieve in the MOU really need to be driven towards a capital account for reinvestment for future parks and facilities, and we're going to talk about that as well. So we'll give you some more granular detail to each of the points. So in terms of filling up the fields and facilities that we have, right now we need to support the existing program partners that we do have, while at the same time researching and implementing some new programming that doesn't exist. And some examples that our residents are currently taking advantage of in the city of Alpharetta are babysitting classes, dance classes, lifeguards or swim certification, all things that we could do potentially now with the Milton Country Club property. So there's opportunities for things that didn't exist that now do exist. And so that's one way we can continue to fill and support the programs that we already, or the facilities and fields we already have. In the topic of the MOU, there's a number of items here. This isn't an all or none. It's sort of a smorgasbord of opportunities, and we're going to go into some detail of each one. So, Tom, you want to click along? The first item A, we're going to recommend to maintain the existing support of the Adult Activity Center at North Park. Our contribution to this program is about $55,000 a year. The City of Milton residents participate at a very high rate in that Alpharetta facility, and we would recommend not touching this one at all and leaving that alone.
So, just to be clear, Scott, you're going to break down the $471,000 that we pay the city on a program-by-program basis. Is that correct?
No, I'm not going to go we can provide you some more details.
No. I'm wondering, what's the $55,000? Where do we get that number?
So that's the money that we currently pay, or that Alpharetta charges us for the Milton residents' participation in activities at the Alpharetta Senior Center in North Park. So we're going to recommend that number.
This is outside of the MOU?
This is in the MOU.
Oh, okay. So this is part of the $471,000?
This is part of the $471,000.
Okay, that's where I started with this.
Sorry.
Okay.
So I'm not
because I wanted to make sure the 471 was an all-in number and that there wasn't extraneous things that add on top of that.
Right. And 471 is 2017's number, not the 2018 number that we're calculating right now.
I'm sure we'll overachieve.
Yes, we will.
Okay.
So I'm identifying in the MOU, not program by program, but I'm going to there were 5 bullets, and I'm going to go through each of those 5 to kind of say what is the implication of each of these in the MOU.
Okay.
So the first one is the Adult Senior Center at North Park, and we would leave that alone. That's not a cost savings. That's a continued expense of $55,000 for the benefit of all the seniors in our city. I think everybody agreed that's a good spend. Number two, this is a big change. In 2017, we had 4 competing programs. And when I say competing programs, those are programs that the City of Milton offers as well as the City of Alpharetta offers. Examples, baseball, football, basketball, and boys lacrosse. Since the acquisition of the Milton Country Club, we've added 3 more programs. We have open swim, we have tennis, and we have swim teams. So now we're at 7 competing programs going forward. And so those are people that are choosing to leave the City of Milton to go participate in Alpharetta's programming. And so we're going to recommend to not support the out-of-city fees for that so that those people have a choice and an incentive to stay in their city, in their program, in their park. To do that saves about $83,000, roughly.
Based on
2017
with only 4
With only 4. You okay? You following me?
Well, no, oh yeah, I'm following you.
Good.
I'm going to question your choice of words because you're stating that our citizens make a decision to leave the city and go to Alpharetta to participate. And I think that it's probably more appropriate they just choose to participate where they choose to participate. It's not a choice of, gosh, am I going to leave the city to do this? I don't think they anguish like that. They just say, oh, I want to play on this thing. And, oh, it's in Alpharetta, let's go.
Right.
Okay.
So that's the second item B. So this is the big item in the MOU. It's been around for a long time, the multiplier. And in the current data, you can see the $135,000 line item. The multiplier was put in, as we described here in 2012, to compensate the City of Alpharetta for some capital investments in their facilities, as well as to give our residents priority access to register so that we get ahead of any other out-of-city residents from Alpharetta's perspective. This topic, some of you on council, Matt knows, we've been in rooms and attempted to renegotiate this in prior years, and I think with the change of administration in Alpharetta, perhaps they're more amenable to discussing this than they were in prior years. It would be certainly nice to see it go away and make it not be 1.5, but I think something less than 1.5 achieves significant savings. The goal of all of these is to kind of get to a number that achieves some savings for us, protects the programming benefits for our residents. And if we had to sacrifice priority registration so that our Milton residents register at the same rate as everyone else, be perfectly okay with that.
So Scott, are you aware, or Jim, of any other cities that have similar MOUs with Alpharetta?
I can answer that. Alpharetta has a limited MOU with Johns Creek with regard to several specific programs, but not all the programs. It addresses girls softball. It addresses, I believe, lacrosse, and one other program. And to my knowledge, the genesis of this is that both cities, these programs were quite small, and so it became easier to help each city with these smaller programs to build numbers up. I do volunteer as a coach in the girls softball league. The Johns Creek girls represent about 30 to 35 girls that are coming over to play softball. And if they didn't play in Alpharetta, there frankly aren't enough to form a league. So they come over and they play, and there's no out-of-city fee there. I am not aware, but in this case, it's kind of a mutual thing. I am not aware of any governmental other agencies that are doing as across the board as we are doing.
So then is it safe to say that the multiplier doesn't apply to anybody other than the City of Milton?
To my knowledge, that is a correct statement.
Okay, and Scott, you're saying what we get for the multiplier is we get to the front of the list for other citizens outside of Alpharetta that are participating in Alpharetta programs.
Correct. And I wasn't here. I mean, I wasn't at the table when it was negotiated, but it also was an investment in their facilities as well for our numbers grew. But it was twofold.
What we're really paying for, we're not paying to get in the front of the line. That's a side benefit. What we're really paying for is infrastructure that they needed to put in place. Now, whether or not they could say the reason we have to put it in place is because of you, or whether they could attach a dollar volume to our impact on their infrastructure, I would question. But that's what it was for, right?
Yep.
Okay.
That's my understanding.
What I would argue, if I could jump in, is that that is what the purpose of the out-of-city fees are. That's why we charge out-of-city fees for out-of-city residents, and so do they.
Okay.
It's to account for the capital investments made by the taxpayers. So the only benefit I do see of this multiplier is putting us ahead of the line, like you said originally.
Right. There's a lot of challenges that we have with this whole thing, but let's keep going.
I'm sorry, if I may also, Mr. Councilman, I am not aware of any capital improvements that were done in Alpharetta Parks and Rec specifically because the MOU is in place. In that regard, I'm going to agree with City Manager that from Alphareta's perspective, that multiplier gains access to the facilities, priority access to the facilities.
Right. There's some things that probably fall under normal wear and tear and maintenance that you could probably account for because the fields do get used more. Facilities, get used up because of extra participation, but I think it's a stretch to say that 50% is the right number. Anyway, keep going. Sorry.
That's all right. Thanks. Item D, the fourth item in the renegotiation, the MOU with Alpharetta, and this is really something that we saw in 2017, is that we would recommend to the city that we do not include any new program that Alpharetta decides to offer, but rather have a checkpoint where they would come to us as a city and say, hey, we've offered this. We would have some information around how our residents have participated in it, and then we would decide whether that's something we're going to support or not. A couple of sports jumped into 2017 that we didn't see coming and achieved some rather significant bills with them. And
Which sports were those?
Gymnastics is one of the larger ones. I think it was in $35,000.
Yes, between individual and team gymnastics, there was substantial. I was going to say leap, but I'm not trying to make a bad pun. There was a substantial increase from 2016 to 2017 with the individual gymnastics, team gymnastics, and dance classes.
Yeah. Again, if they can change the menu and add more things and we don't know it and we're buying them, we need a little better sense of control of that. So that was another lesson learned from the old MOU.
Okay.
Last item, I think, E. This is an area where the two cities vary that if we're going to play nice in the sandbox with our MOU, we should get to equality on our pricing for our out-of-city percentages as well as what the dollar caps are. So the implication of this is that if an Alpharetta resident comes to Milton to participate, it's a 50% charge. And if a Milton resident goes to Alpharetta, it's a 75% charge on that assuming the same registration. So that increases the payment to the city of Alpharetta. So we need to get to parity on that.
Question on that, though, excuse me, Jim, but is that assuming that they're being charged the same?
Yeah.
It's a different percentage, but one program charges $100 and one charges $150.
So I can't tell you that Hopewell Baseball charges the same as Alpharetta Baseball, but they're probably pretty close, might be my assumption. But the fact that the cities have differing percentages changes the fees that are then collected or paid. And how we got there is just needs to be fixed. That's why they have a higher cap and we have a lower one. We try to protect a little bit.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Mayor, I've just now realized I've got one typographical error there. On the very last line, the City of Alpharetta cap is not 120, it is 112.50.
Yeah.
So I apologize for that mistake, but that's their cap.
All right. It's closer. Okay. Scott, Jim, how long does it take us to calculate what we really owe the City of Alpharetta at the end of the year? Is it something that just we know ongoing what the number is day to day? Do we get together on a Saturday in December and crunch the numbers to try to figure this out? How complicated is this?
To receive all the data and then to audit it through our own GIS records to make sure it was correct took me approximately 13 working days. Full. Now, I didn't do that for 13 straight days.
I get what you're saying.
It was about a half
Over the
a month.
course of 13 days, you got it done.
And in my conversation with the person at Alpharetta who does the same, it takes them that long to put it all together.
Yeah, no.
Because, what we did is, it takes us, about a half a day to put together our numbers because our program is smaller.
Right.
But, this past year, we did a complete audit, and that was about 13 days.
Okay.
This last one, so the third item in the recommendation to council about the MOU is any cost savings achieved should get rolled into a capital account for reinvestment into our parks and facilities. We know we have a needs there. There's a next slide is in the master plan that's in research. If you want to go to that, Tom. I know it's a little hard to read. There's that big orange slide bar in the middle. But it's the one to the right of it, and you can see that in every facility and in every field, there's a need that exists today in 2017, and a need exists in 10 years from now in 2027.
So back up to the previous slide. This is the best idea in this deck so far, because I think we ought to set a target for savings this coming year to be about $471,000.
So,
sorry, keep going.
That's quite all right. So we, in all the discussions that we had planned with this, because the $471,000 would, our recommendation is to come off the top line to create savings that pays forward for reinvestment. That's really what the 3 points of our recommendation is. Could you get there faster? Could an option be to blow the entire thing up and to take all of the monies paid to the city of Alpharetta for out-of-city fees and take it off the table and put it in the bank in the city of Milton for an investment in future fees? Sure, you could do that. All of the citizens currently participating in all of that programming then have just taken a 75% price increase for their participation in the programs, and they'll call me and I'm sure they call you. So rather than upset the whole cart, our recommendation to all of you is to take a step back from the current fee and come off of 471 to some number that we can work with on a go-forward basis.
Right, and Scott, I apologize for being sarcastic.
That's quite all right.
And I've said this to you before, the whole reason for the MOU stemmed out of the fact that as a young city, we didn't have the wherewithal to provide programs. And we didn't want our citizens to pay a penalty because we just weren't mature enough. I think that the reality is that we've matured since then, and now this really represents an opportunity cost that keeps us from maturing faster. And I think that most citizens would agree that our money is best spent on our own programs. And so that's the thing that gives me heartburn about this. And it, regardless of the fact that I joke about it, it really amounts to that. And I think that what we're really doing is we're incenting and continue to incent our own citizens to leave the city to go someplace else to get their programming. And even then, the costs that we're paying, they still pay, right? They're just paying the in-city fee. Mm-hmm. And we're paying 1.5 times what the difference is between that and the out-of-city fee is. And so I just think we're doing ourselves an injustice.
I think, we went into this, for said reasons, but we all knew that at some point we'd be working our way out of it because we have grown and matured and we've got things to offer that Alpharetta citizens would want too. So, anybody else, Matt?
Yeah, a couple ways we can go about it. Obviously, we can cut cold turkey as one, or there might be an alternative, which would be a graduated approach, which I think is what you're recommending. Obviously, because we have 1,400 families that are participating in the program that would be impacted personally in their own pocketbooks initially with this. And so, as we look at it, I understand the need to try to raise money again for capital investments in the future because we definitely need that. But if we follow the Parks and Rec program, I'm talking out loud here, and we see what happens with the elimination of the competing sports, for example. tangible test to see what that is. Because then if we get our answer there from the the competing businesses, then we know what the answer is at that point. Even just 1 year might even just give us that. So that's why, am I right in saying this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think, listen, you could go to the negotiation and this may never work. Matt and I have been there and we got laughed out of the room. So you could attempt to renegotiate an agreement and they hold the agreement and we hold what we want and they have what they want and they may agree to nothing of our 5 points and we're right back to where you want to be. But that's the process that has to play out and it doesn't play out here between us. You all have to run that. That's up to you. We're just telling you one way we would approach it, and that's for all you to consider. Those are, so we won't go any further. Other questions on the MOU?
I have one quick question. On those competing programs, I know we talked about capacity at at Bell, Memorial Park for Hopewell Baseball. So if we did what y'all suggested, is there enough capacity to take on those extra players there from Wills?
There's no question that we would be oversubscribed in terms of the ideal capacity on some sports. We do not have the advantage of multiple community centers for gymnasiums for basketball. And we have worked very hard to create what are called ideal capacity numbers. And you can go beyond that ideal capacity and get kids playing, but it starts to become detrimental to the experience. So I suspect you would have an ebb and flow type situation in which, as people are coming back and relying more on the city, we're going to have some capacity issues that will become challenging. But then as the money is being saved and being reinvested into other opportunities to build additional fields, we do have spare capacity right now in rectangular fields through the IGA fields. They are not as pretty as the artificial turf field at Bell Park, but they're still very much usable within certain limitations, lighting, bathrooms, things like that. But we invest in them. We've got over $1 million in them, and they're available. Baseball is a little bit more of a challenge. We're working on trying to come up with other solutions. But if you want me to tell you right here and now, we could take everyone here and no one would feel any pain. I'm not going to say that. There would be some challenges.
Can I qualify that response? Obviously, that depends on price sensitivity and the superior programs. I don't think you're going to see a mass migration. If Alpharetta's got a superior program, I don't think you're going to see a mass migration to a Milton program.
It's all about convenience.
The program,
most of the time
I guess it depends on the level of athlete you're dealing with. So those families that are not price sensitive and they prefer those Alpharetta programs, they're not migrating to the Milton programs, especially if it's a superior program in Alpharetta, and vice versa. So I don't believe that we would see a mass migration as a result of an increase in cost. And there is a cap on that too. We talk about a 75% increase, but it does cap out unless they change the caps on us. But I would assume they would have to change that across the board. So it would certainly depend on how price sensitive people are and how committed they are to the program they're currently in before we forecast any mass migration.
Well, I'm good with all y'all's recommendations. I think this is great. And I'm good with mixing it. I know that's part of the whole negotiation. I just want us to be aware if something happens, we need to be able to service all our citizens in case we have
Yeah, and the reality is, good point, Peyton. We're not, our citizens aren't losing access. They're just losing our financial backing for their access.
Right.
So the program's always going to be available to them.
Yep. But that financial, what they're losing, it's going back into the programs.
Right.
Too. So
In your
we'll
fields.
have better programs.
Some people will never leave, and some will. And the magic is, as Steve alluded, is it 90-10? Is it 80-20? Is it 50-50? We won't know until we know till the decision is made, and then see what the implications of that are. What I can guarantee is it's not, to your point, Jim's point, it won't be 100. They won't all come back and leave one program and come back to ours just because we're changing the fees.
But
The money's not going to matter to some people.
interested in looking at these options. And go ahead, Laura.
My comment, I agree with Peyton. As I recall that discussion back whenever that you have hit every single one of the things that were, at least for me, the trigger to make a change. And so thank you very much. I know this was probably not easy to get to this and many long meetings, and you've done the heavy lifting, and I very much appreciate
Thank
your
you.
efforts. Totally agree.
We got one more thing to cover, and that's the commission structure. So if we're done with the MOU, Tom, you want to move up one more? So now we'll talk about the commission structure. This slide is from our meeting in August. We currently charge a commission, the city does, that's 15% of the program's registration fee. And as you well know, registration fees vary widely across program providers. Some are low-cost sports like tennis, and some are high-cost sports that have subsidies and have and others have no registration fees. So 15% times a registration fee is like trying to hit a moving target. We were challenged to review that, and so there are options, and one is to leave it alone. Another is to remove it altogether. We explored a flat fee in our meeting in August. We shared with you an idea of like a $20 or $25 flat fee, and we got a lot of feedback from the tennis people that would be difficult because their program only costs $40. So that heads the rub of any commission fee structure. And as I alluded to at the beginning of the meeting, we really probably need to pursue some sort of charge by the city to a program provider for the use of that whatever facility or asset that is, and be a little more creative about rewarding them for their efficiency in their scheduling and using it. But we're not ready to discuss item 4 for today. So our next slide and our recommendation to you is to take the fees out altogether. Cities like Alpharetta don't charge fees on top of fees to their residents to participate. As we discussed in our meeting in August, there's a lot of variability about how often a participant in a particular sport touches their field, with baseball being twice a week and football and lacrosse getting as 3 and 4 and sometimes 5 times they get to be on the field. So there's a lot of variability around how often somebody's using that asset. So for us to be able to make a blanket statement today, it was difficult. In the big picture of things, the $67,000 was the revenue that would come in from these commissions in 2018, and to make them go away would be to give up $67,000 by the city of Milton for the residents who are currently participating in their own programs. So that's our recommendation for commission structure.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman. I do want to point out that the recommendation was to eliminate the commission fees, but to maintain any out-of-city fees.
Correct.
Okay.
So it would be $67,000 item we're talking about reducing.
And that is based on FY18 data.
Scott, is the commission charged to the provider or to the participant?
So the provider pays us, and Jim, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's ultimately a per head, per registration
So I guess
fee.
my question is a provider going to lower their fee by 15%? Because it sounds like they're the ones that are going to get...
That would be the intent, right?
Right.
Right. Excuse me, sparkling water. We had 2 years ago lowered it from 30% down to 15%. And what the program providers were able to do is take money and reinvest back into their program, buying new equipment. For example, lacrosse would do uniforms every other year. Now they're able to buy new uniforms. And so we saw a reinvestment in the program in terms of equipment and things that they were doing. What they would do without an elimination, something certainly we can talk with them about. But if we've lowered their costs that substantially, I think we would need to encourage them to do the same.
And I think there's one more slide, Tom, on this one. So in order to do this, there would need to be a change in an ordinance in the city, because it's in the ordinance, the commission fee structure, and then we'd have to go back to, as Jim was educating me earlier, have to go back to the existing provider agreements and amend them, should you all agree to adopt that removal of the commission fee. So, questions for me on commission fee?
Any questions on those fees?
Kind of straightforward.
Okay. Any general questions, comments?
Good job.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Obviously, just like, we talked to on the equestrian side, but obviously we all know sports and Parks and Recreation is a big thing, and it's really important to our citizens and all of us. So thank you for all your hard work, and I know it's you get some tough decisions sometimes. So, all right.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
Mr. Mayor and Council, I would like to just take a moment to point out that there's been a lot of hard work put in here, and I can honestly look you in the eye and tell you every single one of your appointees has worked hard. They've rolled up the sleeves. There's been a lot of, talking, discussion, a lot of battles. I'm pretty proud of how they all put it together, and we were able to boil it down and hopefully make it simple for you. And these recommendations, and if there's any additional assistance, I've given you a slide deck. If you'd like me to send it, I can send it electronically to you if you guys would like that as well.
Okay. I would just, thank you for your comments on that, Jim. And I know myself, and I'm sure everybody else, just seeing the presentation tonight, no, we can see the hard work and time involved. So
Great. Thank you.
Guys. All right. Sudi, do we have any public comment on the next item?
We do not, sir.
All right. If you would please call that on.
This item is discussion regarding the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. Mr. Carter Lucas.
While the weather tonight is perfect for talking about stormwater, I'm sure it had a lot to do with keeping the crowds down. But maybe I have a big online presence tonight. So tonight we wanted to go through our stormwater management program, just to give you a quick overview on this program, introduce you to a few terms. We'll have more educational opportunities coming up if anybody wants to participate in those. But our stormwater program, the regulatory requirements are rooted in the Clean Water Act, developed back in 1972. Out of that act came the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, which we refer to as the NPDES program. There are a lot of components of the NPDES program, whether it's industrial waste or stormwater. MS4 permits is what we're going to be talking tonight, and construction permits are all part of that program, but we'll focus on our MS4 program here tonight. Back in 1990, larger municipalities came under this permit. Those were referred to as the Phase 1 permittees, and those are municipalities and jurisdictions with populations over 100,000. In 1999, a new set of regulations came out that began to affect the smaller communities that are the Phase 2 communities, and that's what we are. We fall in that Phase 2 community with populations under 100,000. And while the permit requirements are different between those two, we usually get a preview of what's coming for the Phase 2 communities when we issue the Phase 1 permit. And so it's a heads up for us in the future. One of the other major components of our stormwater program is the Metropolitan North Georgia Water Planning District. And they were created in 2001 out of some state legislation, which created a multi-jurisdictional program, and that's coordinated through sanitary, stormwater, and domestic water. And there are a number of requirements that mirror the NPDES program, but those are the two major regulatory agencies that oversee our stormwater program. As I mentioned, the MS4 program is what we're talking about tonight, and a term that you'll hear in some of these programs, which represents the municipal separate storm sewer system. And that's basically all of our ditches, pipes, curb and gutter, everything associated with stormwater, outside of combined systems. So in a lot of the older jurisdictions, you'll see combined sanitary sewer and storm sewer systems. We don't have any of those around here, but that's excluded. That's the MS4 focuses mainly on those components of our system that transport and convey stormwater. And so why is all of that important? And so as we begin to become more urbanized and all of these areas begin to develop, they saw a need to direct communities to have a more proactive approach in their stormwater management. Any type of development, whether it's commercial development, single-family residential, even our large lot residential, all of those types of developments have an impact on our water quality. A lot of those impacts also have to do with our water quantity, and that type of development is some of the major causes of flooding in urban areas. So when you look at how a community develops, as you begin to become more and more developed and you have more and more impervious surfaces, the amount of stormwater that infiltrates, which is represented by the black arrow, that amount of water decreases and the amount of runoff from these areas increases. That's the red arrow. And so we've seen a change over the years in how this is dealt with. So years ago, the idea was that you needed to deal with the stormwater and get it out and moved off as quickly as you can. The newer approach and the regulatory requirements that we're seeing today view stormwater as a resource and something that we need to preserve, we need to infiltrate, we need to try and reduce the pollutants before it's discharged into our receiving waters. And so that's what a lot of the program requirements are doing for us now, or doing to us now, depending on your perspective. And it's creating a more proactive approach to our stormwater management, both from a discharge standpoint as well as a maintenance standpoint, rather than a reactive. So in years past, when something happened, we would go out and fix it. Under these requirements that we have now, they require us to look at our stormwater system on an annual basis. And so when you look at what we have in place today, we have over 5,000 structures. We have over 800 outfalls, and each of these permits is issued every 5 years. And so in that 5-year period for that permit window requires us to look at all of our infrastructure components at least once. And so we break it down into basically 20% of the system is inspected every year. So we're looking at over 1,000 structures every year to make sure they are functional, make sure they're in good shape, make sure they aren't clogged. And so all of this is to try and help and improve what they refer to in this permit as non-point source pollution. And non-point source pollution is going to be that which occurs through general runoff. Point source pollution would be if you can go to a pipe and there's pollution coming out of it, that's a point source. But this is dealing with runoff and pollution from just general discharge from various properties. And so the NPDES permit was founded on some key elements. They wanted to make sure that the public was educated and involved in stormwater issues. They wanted the various communities to monitor water quality within the community to make sure that what they had in place was being effective. Identify and map your system, so that was a proactive approach. A few years ago, we went out and we found every storm pipe, every storm structure that we have in the city. And then we have to develop a program which we're going to maintain that. And a lot of that goes back to inspecting 20% of the system every year. And then establishing our regulatory framework by which we're going to not only control our runoff, but we're going to control and deal with runoff from development as it occurs within the city. And when you look at these key program elements, this occurs over almost every department in the city. So it's a program that involves community development, involves public works, some of our public-private partnerships. Almost everybody has a role in this in some form or fashion. So the NPDES permit drilled down and got a lot more specific for the Phase 2 communities and established 6 key programs that we had to comply with. Again, it was our public education and outreach, participation and involvement in stormwater activities throughout the community, illicit discharge and detection, and that's where we go look at all these outfalls every year. And we try and make sure that there aren't illicit connections or things being discharged into our stormwater system other than stormwater. So every time we go to an outfall, which is basically the end of a pipe or a ditch that's discharging into a stream, if it's not dry at the time we look at it, we've got to test it. And we test it for things like surfactants, which are going to be detergents and things. We're going to test for fecal, pH, a number of things that can tell us if something that's not supposed to be there is there. And if it is there, we've got to go back and try to find the source of it and rectify that. Construction site controls, that's our basic erosion and sediment controls program that we have. Post-construction runoff controls are going to be our stormwater management ordinances that we implement during the development of a project to control discharges from a site afterwards. And then our pollution and prevention good housekeeping. That is things we do in-house, training that we do in-house. This tonight is one of those. We have a requirement every year to present to our governing body some stormwater component as an educational piece. So thank you for participating in this.
So Carter.
Yes, sir.
Sorry, go ahead. So you're saying the 5,000 or so structures that we've got that fit into this category get tested once a year on item number 3, which was the detection of problematic substances? Yeah, that's my point.
We have each structure. So in a stormwater system where you've got catch basins and pipes, we have 5,000 of those. When the system gets to a point where it actually discharges, that's what we call the outfall, and we have roughly 846 of those. And that's what we look at every year to test. Yeah, right. Okay. And so we look at 20% of those each year. The key and the trick is to go after it's been dry for a long period of time so that the outfall is essentially dry and there's no testing to do. So we didn't make that up.
This is a strategy? Is that what you're saying?
That's actually a guideline because you want to make sure that if you've got an illicit connection there, that it's easier to detect when it's not mixed with rainfall.
Right. The reason I was bringing it up is because at the very beginning of the presentation, this whole thing was couched as a management of pollution.
Correct.
Okay? And I just thought that was an interesting way of saying it. I mean, I get what the goal is, but do we have a pollution problem?
So we actually have one designated stream that is on what they refer to as a 303D list. And that 303D list identifies impaired waters in the state. And ours is Cooper Sandy, and it's actually listed for suspended solids. So we have a special program in the Cooper Sandy Basin where you've got to do extra erosion sediment control during construction. We have extra testing and monitoring that we do within that basin. And if it doesn't improve over a period of years, then we've got to step it up and do something else to try and improve the water quality in that basin. So, yes, I would say that we do.
Okay.
And each stream is listed for a different thing. So you could have biota, which are the bugs and critters in the streams. You could have fecal. A lot of streams around here are actually listed for fecal, and I was surprised that wasn't one of ours. And whether it's from septic systems or it's from just general runoff from agricultural areas, that has a lot to do with the impairments. Yes, sir.
Grass, leaves, that type of stuff doesn't count as, you don't look for that, like where I sometimes see people blow all their leaves or their grass into the stormwater.
Totally illegal. And subject to fines if they're caught.
I bet you would find a lot of people throughout the subdivisions too.
Really?
So what happens with that is it tends to clog the storm drainage systems.
I get it, but yeah, I would be scared to go around my neighborhood and count the number of people that are doing that.
Yeah, almost impossible to regulate, but not a legal activity.
That's what I'm thinking, because a lot of people think it's okay, but it's like, where's that going? That's going to end up down in the detention pond.
That's right.
In different places, it's going to start to clog.
It begins to clog the streams. It begins to reduce the capacity of the streams, create additional erosion in the stream. So
if you put grass that's been treated with fertilizer and other stuff,
that's right.
Pesticides, and that's going to be going into the stream water too.
And the educational component of this program is supposed to help educate communities that that is not a good thing. And in the fall, we generally have an ad that we run talking about leaves and how it's not appropriate to put those in stormwater facilities. And hopefully, as the education continues and gets a little bit better, people begin to realize what is right and wrong from a stormwater perspective. And you'll see, as I won't go through all of these, but just to make you aware, for each of those 6 elements of our program, there are key defined and measurable standards that we have to meet. And so if you look at, for an example, the public education and outreach, we have to distribute 100 pamphlets during the course of the year, whether it's at the library or the court, or we keep some out here in the lobby. 100. It's a defined and measurable standard. And we have to publish 2 articles. And so a lot of that has to do, we do the leaf thing and do the dog. We have a number of different ones that we put not only on our website, but Teresa helps out a lot in the schools and at various events. And so I'll just run through these real quickly, but you'll see each of those 6 has some defined standards that we have to meet and we have to report on and we get audited on every year. So the report and the approval of our report is a very time-consuming component for us. And in fact, our 2017 report approved last month. So it's a very long and iterative process for us as we go through all of the standards that we have to do each year to meet our permit standards.
Carter, is that just the nature of the thing, or is it we're not doing enough?
It's the nature of the requirements.
Okay.
And how we report them. And so in a lot of cases, we report them in a way that we believe is understandable, but it gets to the state when they review these, and they're reviewing them from hundreds of different communities. And so if it's not exactly like they expect to see it, then...
They have a standard, a template, guidelines?
Yes. I wish it was that easy. It seems like it should be easier. It just doesn't ever seem to be, but... And every community's requirements are slightly different. So when we put together the permit at the beginning of the 5-year cycle, there's typically a number of different ways you can accomplish each activity. And so we may have selected a way that's different from Alpharetta or different than Roswell to accomplish the same thing, just in a different manner. And so the review process for that, for the state, they've got to see 150 different types of applications.
Carter, can you just tell me what would an inspection? We're inspecting 20% of these, the numbers that you gave us. What does that equate to? What is an inspection? What do you actually do from a city standpoint?
So we have essentially 3 different types of inspections that we'll do. We'll do a storm structure inspection, which is basically a manhole catch basin. And in those cases, it's literally just opening the manhole, doing a visual inspection to make sure that it's not clogged, there's no obvious defects in the structure, and move on to the next one. We do an outfall inspection, which is at the end of the system where that system may discharge into a creek or a pond. And at that point, we're doing a visual inspection to see if there is any discharge or flow from that outfall. If there is, we're going to take a sample. That sample gets shipped to a lab, and we determine whether or not there's anything bad in that water. If there is, then that process continues where we move upstream to each structure and continue to test as we go upstream until we can narrow down the source. Sometimes you can find it. Sometimes it's just a joint in a pipe or a structure somewhere, and it leads to nothing. But the program requires us to track that source down. And then,
so if you have a problem with the water sample, that's what you would do. You'd start working up that.
Correct.
When you do the inspection, let's say you're looking at a neighborhood and you're looking at manholes, do you check every manhole just to visually, that constitutes one of those?
They do. And then we do stormwater detention ponds. So post about 2010, when we had stormwater management agreements in place, and for us probably goes back to 2008, where we have the stormwater agreements for those ponds, we also do an inspection on those. So not every stormwater pond in the city has a stormwater agreement, and we don't inspect all of those. But for those, which are about 85 ponds at this point, where we have those agreements in place, the newer ponds, we do inspections on those also.
You look at if it has a weir, you'd look at the weir that could...
Correct. That's correct. So it just depends on the type of facility that it is. But, right, your basic stormwater pond, you're going to look at the dam, you're going to look at the vegetation, the outlet control structure, those types of things, just to make sure that it's in operational condition. And then the final one that we have to deal with, Metropolitan North Georgia Water Planning District. Again, this was created in 2001, and it really deals a lot more with domestic water and sanitary, but there is a stormwater component of it that we have to deal with it. So the domestic water and the sanitary component, we piggyback a lot with what Fulton County does with those programs. But the stormwater components of this program are something that we have to deal with too. And while they mirror a lot of the NPDS requirements, it is a whole separate record keeping that we have to keep. And we do get audited on this periodically. And so they'll come in and go through the overall program elements and make sure that for the, 20 or 30 different stormwater elements that we've got something in place and we're trying to deal with those components of it. So in future installments of this program, we'll get into a little bit more depth on some of these elements, but I did want to give you kind of an overview on what we do each year with our stormwater program. And it's really quite comprehensive program that you may or may not have realized that we were dealing with. But that's all I had. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Rivers Alive, does that count as one of our street sites?
Does. Yeah, it's a very important component of that. As well, our Adopt a Road component. So most communities have a requirement to do street sweeping, and we've been able to use our Adopt a Road in place of that up to this point.
So if a development is owned still by the developer, it's stalled, and those stormwater drains, they have the fabric catch. Whose responsibility is that? Is that the city's, or is it, since the homes haven't been built and there's no one occupying, is that our responsibility, or is it the owner of the stalled development?
So at the time of the final plat, a maintenance bond is issued on those developments. And so it's going to be the responsibility, even though the infrastructure has been dedicated to the city, as long as that maintenance bond is in place, which is typically 12 to 18 months, we put that responsibility back on the developer to ensure that those things are maintained. And then prior to releasing the bond, we'll do an inspection on those facilities, and any deficiencies or cleaning up that needs to be done, they'll have to do that before we release the bond.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Have we ever enforced a bond?
Not that I know of.
We've never revoked. We've never gone for revocation. I think we've threatened it.
We've gone through the process where they have to make those corrections, but I don't know that we've ever called a bond since I've been here. They've always done the work.
All right. Anybody else?
Thank you.
Question. Just humor me. So soil and sedimentation ordinances.
Like I'm in court.
those are, during an active LDP, during a permitting, you have your BMPs installed, and they pertain to water quality and water quantity. The water quality, though, the way I read the state statute, is more focused on turbidity. That's really where you start talking. So if your turbidity is kept to a reasonable amount, that's almost synonymous with water quality, which is different, however, than non-point source discharge. There you start talking about literally almost the chemical composition of what could be in the water itself. And I guess my question was, how do you test that? Do y'all have an expert or a lab?
It's an iPhone app.
It's an iPhone app. You taste it. You just shove back a big. Okay.
The testing of the turbidity.
Well, or even the testing of the chemical components, maybe some phosphate or.
Yeah, you listed like 4 different things that you needed to test for. Is there one test that does them all, or you're running 4 different tests?
So there's a few things that you can test for in the field.
Okay.
So you can test for pH. You can test for conductivity. You can test for temperature. You can test for the turbidity is the nephelometric turbidity unit, and it's a turbidimeter that we use to test that.
That's transparency.
Pardon me?
Basically.
It's almost,
yes,
yeah.
right. It's how much light can go through a sample of water, and it can range anywhere from 0, which would be what's in your bottle right there, to thousands if you've got very turbid water. And so some of those things you can test for in the field, things like fecal, surfactants, things like that, they're lab tests. So you take a sample, package it up, send it to the lab, they send you back results.
Thank you. Just curious.
Any other questions? Anybody in the audience? No? Okay.
Thank you.
Sudi, would you call our fourth, do we have any public comments for item number 4?
We do not, sir.
Can you call number 4 then?
Our fourth and final item is discussion regarding the request for variance policies and procedures. Mr. Ken Gerard.
Members of the council, thank you all for being willing to hear this very briefly this evening. This is an issue that's sort of near and dear to my heart simply because it's an issue that I have grappled with a little bit since I've been city attorney in Milton. We have raised it not only really with the council, not so much. I have definitely discussed it with the BZA before. And it pertains to your variance criteria. I know this is somewhat timely given some of the discussions we've had of late, although I would respectfully propose that we not revisit that, but it is timely nonetheless. So the variance criteria in Milton are sort of and sort of not a holdover from Fulton County. What I mean by that is we did in fact get a set of variance criteria when the city of Milton was created. But they've been modified since then a little bit, and so I think that's worthy of some discussion. But you all have probably heard me say before that I think Milton's variance criteria are challenging. They are structured in such a way that there are 4 criteria. The first, third, and fourth are not that bad. Number 1, relief if granted would not offend the code. Number 3, relief if granted would not cause a substantial detriment to the public good. Number 4, that the public health, safety, and welfare are secured. I mean, I know this council well enough to know y'all are going to consider a variance that would implicate any 3 of those things. The second one, though, is where we always the rubber sort of hits the road, if you will. And interestingly, it's the second paragraph that was actually modified since we inherited the bulk of this language from Fulton County. The second paragraph says, there are such, y'all have heard this language a million times, you could probably repeat it in your sleep, extraordinary and exceptional situations or conditions pertaining to a piece of property that the literal or strict application of the code creates an unnecessary hardship due to size, shape, or topography. Stop. That's one concept right there. The notion that the physical characteristics of the property just make the practical and literal application of our code unwieldy. If I was to say the classic variance criteria, that's it. Because the classic variance criteria, at least in my head, was always where a piece of property, when you combine it with your numerical performance standards, particularly buffers and setbacks and some of your numerical requirements, it just doesn't work. And so a property owner would literally come to the council and say, if I apply this code to this lot of record, I can't build. I can do nothing on my property. Well, voila, guess what? We've got a variance provision that will allow us to vary some of those because due to the unusual size, shape, or topography of your property, you need relief. That's the classic variance language. However, we added to that in Milton because then there's an or, which separates a different phrase of the criteria, or other extraordinary and exceptional situations or conditions not caused by the variance applicant. Okay, that second part is not really tethered to the physical characteristics of the property. That second part is something simply extraordinary and exceptional. And I don't have to tell you, but extraordinary and exceptional gives you a little bit of a wide berth because something can be perceived as extraordinary and exceptional that's in the eye of the beholder. One person may see it as extraordinary, another person may not. But there is some flexibility there. I will also say, though, that because these criteria, 1, 2, 3, and then 4 are separated or I guess conjoined by an and, you have to find all 4 of them before you can grant a variance. That's a challenging standard, and candidly, the council has its fair share of variances, but the reality is the BZA is doing a lot of your variance work, And I struggle with it. I'm just telling you this. This is actually, I think the city manager put this on because it's something I've been struggling with for a while. Just because I would like to see the city have the flexibility to grant a variance when it needs to grant a variance when you believe that the variance is needed because that produces the best outcome without having to trip all over some of this challenging language. Now, I'll be the first to tell you, I know that some jurisdictions push back a little bit at wanting to loosen the language. The fear being is that if we loosen the language too much, we throw our criteria right out the door, and so that every situation becomes that situation that warrants a variance. And I don't want to push you down that road either, nor would I feel like I could. But I wanted to raise it. Maybe this is a situation where you want to get some public or some other sorts of input to guide you. That's fine as well. But I thought, given the temporal nature of us discussing this last week, given that we discussed it again in the spring, given that I've discussed it repeatedly with the ZBA, given that I discuss it with city staff all the time, it might be time to discuss it with you and see if you want to give any direction. If you say, members of the council, Ken, we agree, but we're happy with our language and we'll just deal with it when it comes up, you're not going to hear any resistance from me, but I wanted to at least raise it to you.
So, Ken, you mentioned early on that of the 4 criteria, 1, 3, and 4 were you felt pretty good about. It was number 2 that gets the most attention. But then you pointed out that there's an and in between all 4 of those.
That's true.
So they have to all be true in order for us to grant a variance.
That is true.
Well, if 1, 3, and 4 are pretty sound,
yes.
In other words, we would never have a problem with those, it really makes number 2 the real defining factor, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So can you remind me when we modified 2 to include the or condition?
We are sleuthing that down right now. We believe it was between 2006 and 2009.
Okay. Oh, good. That predates me.
We have been digging back through trying to because I'm trying to find the intent of the change.
Right.
To see what it is the council was trying to accomplish at the time, so I can provide that to you all, so you can start thinking about, okay, how do you really want this to apply?
Because there's other language that always gets lumped into this discussion, and I can't put a finger on where I hear it the most. But it has to do with financial hardships not being a hardship or not counting as a criteria. But depending on how you interpret number 2, that could directly translate into a financial condition. And if it does, we're supposed to negate it. Now, since you read it to me again, there is no mention of that. So this is all
the
folklore.
Hardship. There is a hardship language. Remember, okay, so think of paragraph 2. Let's erase from our mind 1, 3, and 4 for a second. We're only going to talk about 2. So 2 is a tale of 2 elements. There's the first element related to the usual characteristics of the property. That's what's got the hardship language in it. And then the second element of that paragraph doesn't mention anything about hardship. It just says generically, are there any, think of it this way, other extraordinary and exceptional situations or conditions not caused by the variance applicant? That's a fairly wide berth to give you. I mean, I will tell you, your city manager has raised that to me and has almost made me a believer as I have focused on it more. It is, but I will also go back to the notion of extraordinary. That language is mimicked in both parts of the test. In the topo and physical configuration of the property, it has to be extraordinary and exceptional, and in the generic, it has to be extraordinary and exceptional.
But as you say, there's
in the
no objective criteria to define extraordinary.
There is not. That is true.
And the fact that those 2 pieces of number 2 are connected with an or means we can ignore part 1 if part 2 applies, and we can ignore part 2 if part 1 applies.
That is consistent with generally accepted practices of statutory construction. Yes.
And it's clear that it was intentionally added at some point during that 3-year period. So there was intent to widen that for whatever reason.
Because if you think about it, if you didn't have that second element, you could only give a variance when there was some unusually shaped piece of property with an attendant hardship. That would be the only situation where you could do it. So no, the or and the second element is sort of pop the cork.
When you look at other municipalities, how are they structured as far as?
All over the place.
Really?
All over the place. A lot of them may mimic this. Some of them don't have the and there. Some of them simply say, these are the elements you shall consider when granting. Yeah, and you just consider them all. That gives you the latitude to deny it if you don't see it. It gives you the latitude to grant it if you like it. But, and look, I don't want to get ahead of myself. Some jurisdictions want this to be onerous. They want this to be difficult to get. And that's fine, but also you give too many variances for the cabana and the pool setback, eventually the language begins to lose its meaning.
I guess that's one of the questions I've got. When you reviewed variances, including the ones that we don't see, which are a lot of them, what's your conclusion? Are we meeting the standard? Because I know if the BZA, in fact, passes that, we don't have any recourse as a council. It has to go to court.
I think that your inferior tribunals, and that's not an insult, that's just the way they're called, I think they are doing the best they can with this language. But just for instance, I'm going to divorce my discussion from Milton. I mean, I go to multiple jurisdictions, and this is the way the variance discussion goes. Forget it. This is not about Milton. This is not a Milton-centric example. So they're up there, and they'll say, I want to put a pool or put a deck or whatever on my piece of property. It's the smallest piece of property, and I'll literally hear someone from the tribunal say, now, have you talked with your neighbors about it? Well, we have. Do you have letters of support from them? Why, yes, I do. All right, well, there's not a lick of that in here. There's nothing in this criteria that talks about, or the criteria from that jurisdiction that talks about popular support dictating whether or not it should be granted or not. But that's just the way it works, and it's just a bunch of folks on these performing their civic duty on a voluntary board, trying the best they can to deal with a difficult situation and provide some relief the best way they know how.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, there's obviously two ways that this can go. From what you just said, it sounds like that the language is kind of in the middle. We can be more restrictive by removing that second part of item 2.
Yes.
In one sense. Or perhaps because of what you just said, if there would be more want for some kind of a variance based on the neighbors or whatever, that you could be less restrictive from where we are today.
That's correct.
So we're kind of right in the middle right now.
We are. If you took away the second element right now, you would severely lock this thing down, and that would even give me more heartburn. That's not where I am. I am actually have sort of been driving for a little less. But I know my place as well, and if y'all don't want to consider that.
So the question, I guess, kind of goes as well to staff, too, and Steve, maybe you can tell us, are you seeing a problem with our current language as a result? And I'm not hearing any complaints from the BZA as far as it goes. I'm just trying to see what staff's opinion is and how they're doing with the current language first.
So, problem. It's not a problem if people are getting what they want because you're not going to hear about it.
Right.
I think, and we're in the process of pulling the numbers, but I know I did that. We went through this exercise just a year ago looking at the rates.
Right.
And I think what you're generally seeing from your BZA, I often equate to the old Rockefeller drug laws in New York. They were designed to be they were dealing with the huge influx of cocaine and eventually crack, and they created all these very stringent laws. It took discretion away from DAs and judges, and it created mandatory prison terms. So and it was all designed to be able to reduce violence and drug use. It didn't reduce drug-related violence, and it didn't reduce drug use, but what it did is it incarcerated an entire generation. As DAs and judges started to recognize the negative impact of that, they fixed it themselves. They authorized lower plea bargains. They charged differently at grand jury to be able to make sure that they didn't get caught in that net and people go away for 50 years for a little bit of drugs. So they fixed it themselves. I think that's generally what you're seeing with the BZA is they are recognizing there's an issue. Certainly the You know, it's not the same as being held. We're not talking about people's lives here, but I think they've recognized it's an issue, and I think they're finding a way to kind of make it right in their minds.
So
that's my synopsis. They've never shared that with me, and I've never discussed it with them.
Sure.
But that is my guess as to what's going on.
Are we thinking that they are making decisions outside of the bounds of the current variance language?
They may be thinking that those situations are exceptional or extraordinary.
So technically, no, not outside the bounds, just based on a subjective criteria.
The only thing I could do is that would be my belief.
Okay.
I think that's fair.
Yes.
So I'm comfortable with the or and the extraordinary and exceptional as it relates to council. I was comfortable with the discussion that I was able to justify in that prior hearing. I would suggest that if we're considering, council and the BZA, maybe we have a meeting with the chair and the vice chair of that to get their input directly. I would defer to them. They're the subject matter experts. They deal with it on a monthly basis. And I just want to ask, this language, the requirement for proving hardship can be waived in exceptional cases. Is that when you go forward to an appeal? I can't find it anywhere, but it's.
Where is that?
I don't know. That's why I've asked. I had asked. It was exceptional cases where a clear and compelling public interest can be legitimately argued. So I'm trying to understand where that language. I can't officially find it anywhere.
It's not in there.
Okay.
I mean, that's one of the rubs of this language is it doesn't have. I mean, if it had that kind of language, that would also give us sort of an unstated power to sort of a de facto workaround, but it's not in there.
So okay, but I find that I find this or in extraordinary and exceptional situations. I'm comfortable with my justification
for
of course. What took place last week.
I kind of think that a lot of people thought that the language meant something as it was, and if we look at it on its face, I think we're starting to realize, as Steve so pointed out, that it actually has a little more leniency to it already written in the language. Obviously, we don't know where it came from 2006 to 2009, but it's in there. And so maybe on that, we're looking at what the BZA is doing, and they're kind of following the language that's in there. I'm not so sure that they're not, and so I'm not seeing the problem based on how we're interpreting the language right now. Does that make sense?
There's a line in The Incredibles where
how old are your kids?
I'm digging this.
Just checking.
I want to make sure this gets caught.
Where one of the characters says, I want to be exceptional, and someone says, well, everyone's exceptional, to which then the response is, well, then no one is. I only make that comment because I continue to believe, with all deference to my extraordinary city manager, that second element containing extraordinary and exceptional requirements is still strong language. That's the only point I want to make, is that's still a fairly high burden, with your comments still well heard.
And the real reality is that, okay, practicality from that perspective, we talk about a hardship language, but if someone comes before us with a variance that for whatever reason goes to court, then we're really looking at on the subjective aspect of a court to look at the word extraordinary and come to their own conclusion as well.
That's a point well made. I think that's right, and that would be a difficult thing to disprove, that no one could have found exceptional circumstances.
Yeah, but Ken, we're overusing superlatives here.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to your point, if everything is extraordinary, nothing's extraordinary, right?
That was
and for us, now I'm not going to second guess any decision that the council's ever made, but we can go through and find varying levels of extraordinary. Is going to be the challenge. Because if we were to review everything and stack them up next to one another, we would see extraordinary was way up over here for this one, but it was way down here for that one.
Well, and to argue that a little bit, though, doesn't extraordinary then go into the legislative capacity of us determining what is extraordinary and what is not?
That's why we shouldn't have a problem with the language, because it's given us ultimate flexibility. But I think what our attorney's trying to point out is we ought to look at crafting that language so that it means what it says, and we're not stretching it all different ways.
I want you all to have the flexibility that you're not having to find something extraordinary when it may not be extraordinary. It may just be desirable, is the only point.
Or just so, well, I'm just
Okay, first, I would love to know why council changed it. I mean, I would just love to know the reason and why. I mean, we're obviously not going to make a decision tonight. I would prefer, I mean, you know, we've been doing this for 12 years. It puts a lot of protections in place in the future. So if you told me tonight, what would I do? I'd rather just keep it the way it is. But I would like to see that, and maybe Ken can come up with some suggestions, and we can talk to the BZA, and maybe we can come up with some.
I think that's good direction. I ran out of time trying to locate the meeting in which this happened. Carter and I were going through a binder about this big, where we were trying to pull out what originally came from Fulton County when we adopted, and then we pulled out another piece which showed that we were able to narrow it down between 2006 and 9. You know something.
2009, I spoke with my appointee, Todd Chernick, and he has the historic, the reasoning for the changes.
I'll have to get it from what I found in 2009 had to do with signs.
And I was in the grocery store trying to capture as much of this, but I think that's where some of your.
That'll be easy enough. I can do that tonight if I can narrow it down to 2009.
I just wanted to hear your thoughts. I've heard them, and I appreciate every one of them. And if the city manager can find that, and we can get together and perhaps bring something back.
I'll get that information over to Ken just to make sure we're capturing the intent and spirit of what why that section was changed, and then maybe if you feel that there's any need for outreach or anything along those lines, we do have boards like the Planning Commission and the BZA. Well, BZA probably wouldn't be appropriate, but the Planning Commission that could work together with staff if we wanted to do some outreach on this. Or conversely, you may find out that the spirit and intent is exactly as it is, and
so.
There's nothing to do.
Yeah, I guess what I think I heard you say is two things. We do have the legislative ability to define what exceptional and extraordinary is.
Of course.
But under normal terms, you're saying it's not necessarily what's just desirable or the best economic use or the direction we need to see. I think that's when we come into public conflict, where people are coming up and saying, hold it, the variance says this. Clearly, that's not what's happening.
Well,
and again, that's public interpretation.
That's right.
And we still ultimately hold the responsibility to make the decision. I guess I'm wondering, are we making more decisions for these reasons that it's actually extraordinary and exceptional? Is it really something different that we're...
I'm not going to try to get into the subjective thought process of all the council members. I mean, the council members, that's the beauty of being a council member. You know sort of what is going on in your head and the reasons you're making the decisions you're making. But I do think you're right that from a perception standpoint, we have to make sure we pass, and it less the council, even more the BZA, because they're making more of these decisions than you all are. We just want to give them the tools to succeed. That's the bottom line.
Or do we improve upon this by changing the wording?
Without throwing out the baby with the bathwater, right?
Because you're still saying it has to be all four.
Still has to be all four. Candidly, to me, I mean, once you have done something that doesn't offend the spirit and intent of the code, I think you've gone a long way. I mean, you're making a decision. Whatever relief we're granting here is consistent with the overall ordinance we have in place. That gives me a lot of protection. That makes me feel comfortable about what you're doing. Number 2 is the challenging paragraph.
Right. that's the one that people will come forward many times and quote.
That's correct.
Well, apparently they're only quoting half of it, because you never hear the second part of that. But that's okay. Anybody else have questions? All right, we good?
We're good.
All right, we need to vote to move to executive session.
So moved. Second.
We got a motion.
Would you mind, and from council member, would you mind stating the purpose? I think it was land acquisition. We do.
I'll make a motion that we move into executive session to discuss land acquisition.
Thank you, sir.
Second.
All right, we have a motion to move into executive session to discuss land acquisition. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? That passes unanimously.
This week, you'll find great deals at Walgreens, like 16-ounce Blue Diamond almonds, just $4.99 with card and coupon. Or get select varieties of General Mills cereal, 2 for $3 with card and coupon. And start your morning right with Javalia coffee, 12-ounce ground, just $4.99 with card. Get great deals on the essentials you need right here at your This week, you'll find great deals at Walgreens, like 16-ounce Blue Diamond almonds, just $4.99 with card and coupon. Or get select varieties of General Mills cereal, 2 for $3 with card and coupon. And start your morning right with Javalia coffee, 12-ounce ground, just $4.99 with card. Get great deals on the essentials you need right here at your neighborhood Walgreens. Walgreens, trusted since 1901. While supplies last, restrictions and exclusions apply. See store for details.